Arjun Malhotra was a celebrated doctor in Birmingham, admired by patients and respected by colleagues. But behind the polished suits and luxury lifestyle, he was running a £3 million marriage visa fraud. Maya Kapoor, the former lover he once discarded, uncovered his darkest secrets and exposed him to the world, setting off a chain of betrayal, revenge, and tragedy that ended in his shocking suicide. In the bustling city of Birmingham, where the diversity of cultures blends into a constant hum of activity, Arjun Malhotra was a figure who stood out effortlessly. His reputation as an Indian doctor who had made a name for himself in the UK earned him admiration from colleagues and respect from patients. He drove expensive cars, wore designer suits, and lived in an elegant home in one of the city's wealthiest neighborhoods. To anyone looking from the outside, he was the embodiment of success. A man who had worked hard to climb the ladder and achieve everything he had ever dreamed of. Yet, beneath this flawless exterior was a hidden truth so dangerous that it would one day destroy him completely. Arjun's story began long before the wealth and glamour. When he first arrived in the UK as a young medical student, he struggled to fit in. He faced long hours, financial pressure, and the weight of expectations from his family back in India. He promised himself he would rise above the challenges, no matter what it took. Over time, he discovered that ambition alone would not satisfy him. He craved not only success, but also power, money, and influence. His medical career provided him with stability, but it was not enough for the life he envisioned. That was when he began to notice the desperation of those around him, immigrants struggling for visas, families searching for a way to secure their future, and individuals willing to pay almost anything to escape their circumstances. It started with one arrangement. A casual favor for a friend turned into a transaction, and the transaction turned into a business. Arjun realized that his professional status gave him an air of credibility that no one would question. He began connecting desperate immigrants with individuals willing to enter sham marriages in exchange for money. With forged documents, staged photos, and carefully rehearsed stories, he created the illusion of love and stability. Each case brought in tens of thousands of pounds, and before long, he had orchestrated dozens of such marriages. The money flowed in, and his appetite for wealth grew insatiable. By the time he had accumulated millions, Arjun had perfected the system. He had associates who arranged meetings, people who falsified paperwork, and connections who ensured the weddings appeared legitimate. He hid his involvement behind layers of secrecy. Confident that no one would ever suspect a respected doctor of running such an operation, he lived a double life. One where he was the caring professional physician, admired by his community, and another where he was the mastermind of a fraud worth nearly £3 million. Despite his brilliance in covering his tracks, cracks began to appear. Some marriages dissolved sooner than expected, raising quiet suspicions. A few victims felt cheated when promises of security failed to materialize. Yet Arjun believed he was untouchable, convinced that his charm, intelligence, and professional status would shield him from any danger. What he could not have predicted was that the greatest threat would not come from the authorities, but from someone who knew him intimately, someone whose heart he had once broken, and someone who was quietly watching every step he took. Maya Kapoor had once believed that Arjun Malhotra was the man who would change her life forever. She had met him during her early days working as a nurse in the same hospital where he was climbing the ranks as a promising young doctor. His confidence, charm, and easy smile made him magnetic, and Maya, who had always been practical and cautious, found herself falling for him quickly. At first, the relationship seemed genuine. He took her out to fine restaurants, bought her thoughtful gifts, and spoke of a future filled with possibilities. For a woman who had dedicated much of her life to hard work and sacrifice, his attention felt like a dream. But dreams have a way of fading when the truth begins to surface. Over time, Maya began noticing cracks in Arjun's stories. He often disappeared for long stretches, offering vague explanations about late-night meetings or family obligations. He always seemed to have cash on hand, far beyond what his official salary could justify. Yet he brushed off her questions with a quick laugh or a dismissive remark. Maya wanted to believe him, but deep down, unease grew. When she accidentally stumbled across a folder in his study containing photos of Arjun with other women in what appeared to be staged wedding ceremonies, her world collapsed. She realized she was not the only woman in his life. Far from it. Confronting him had been the turning point. Arjun's reaction was not guilt or remorse, but cold detachment. He admitted without hesitation that the women in the photos were part of arrangements he had made, though he painted them as harmless favors. When Maya pressed further, he turned cruel, mocking her for being naive enough to think she was special. The betrayal cut deeper than any wound she had ever known. She ended the relationship, but the scars never healed. Maya tried to move on, pouring herself into her work. But Arjun's shadow lingered everywhere. She read about his successes in medical journals, saw his name on hospital boards, and occasionally glimpsed him at social events surrounded by admiration. Each reminder reignited her anger. How could he live so openly, celebrated as a model of success, when she knew he was hiding a rotten empire beneath the surface? Her heartbreak transformed into an obsession. She started keeping track of his movements, listening to whispers about his extravagant lifestyle, and collecting any detail that confirmed her suspicions. The more she uncovered, the clearer it became. Arjun was not just living a double life. He was thriving from it. He had built an empire of deceit, and no one around him seemed willing to look deeper. Maya decided she would be the one to expose him. At first, her motivation was revenge, but as she pieced together the stories of those he exploited, her purpose grew sharper. She began to see herself not only as a woman wronged, but also as the only person capable of bringing him down. The betrayal that once left her broken would become the fire that fueled her mission. And Arjun had no idea that the woman he had discarded would soon be the architect of his downfall. Maya's plan to dismantle Arjun's empire began with patience. She knew that going directly to him or confronting him publicly would only end in failure. Arjun was clever, respected, and skilled at twisting the truth to suit his needs. If she wanted to expose him, she had to be meticulous. She started by gathering every scrap of evidence she could find. Old photos from their time together, receipts he had carelessly left behind, and fragments of conversations she remembered became puzzle pieces. She cross-referenced dates, names, and places until a pattern emerged. It was no longer just a suspicion in her mind. It was a map of his fraudulent operation. When she felt she had enough to raise suspicion, Maya made her first anonymous contact with the immigration authorities. Her email was detailed, filled with names of individuals Arjun had arranged marriages for, along with copies of the photos she had once discovered. She expected her claims to be ignored, but instead, they caught immediate attention. Authorities had long been aware of sham marriages, but lacked the evidence to prosecute powerful figures involved. Maya's tip was a spark that lit their investigation. Suddenly, Arjun's activities were no longer hidden in the shadows. But Maya's thirst for revenge was not satisfied by a simple report to the government. She wanted to watch his life unravel before the world. Using a false identity, she leaked photos of Arjun to local media outlets, showing him with women in staged ceremonies. She sent anonymous letters to hospital administrators questioning how a man with such unexplained wealth could remain in a position of trust. Slowly, whispers turned into rumors, and rumors turned into headlines. The doctor once praised for his brilliance was now the subject of suspicion. Arjun noticed the shift almost immediately. Patients canceled appointments. Colleagues who once admired him began to keep their distance. And journalists started making inquiries about his private life. He tried to remain composed, brushing it all off as jealousy or professional rivalry, but the cracks were undeniable. He became increasingly paranoid, convinced that someone close to him was orchestrating the attacks. Still, he underestimated the depth of Maya's determination. She watched everything unfold from a careful distance, her satisfaction growing each time his image appeared more tarnished. The authorities escalated their investigation, and soon Arjun's home was raided. Officers confiscated documents, computers, and records that hinted at financial irregularities. For the first time, Arjun realized that he was in real danger. He had always believed he could outsmart the system, but now the walls were closing in faster than he anticipated. His empire, built over years of deceit, was beginning to crumble brick by brick. Maya followed the news obsessively. Each headline felt like vindication, each development like a step closer to justice for the humiliation she had suffered. Yet, as the scandal grew, she began to sense that the consequences might stretch far beyond Arjun himself. Families who had trusted him, immigrants who had sacrificed everything for a chance at stability, were now exposed to risk. In her drive for revenge, she had set into motion a chain of events that would ruin more lives than she ever intended. But by then, it was far too late to turn back. As the scandal intensified, Arjun Malhotra found himself trapped in a spiral of losses that seemed to multiply with each passing day. His once flawless reputation had been destroyed by the media frenzy. And the same colleagues who had once praised his intelligence and work ethic now avoided him as if he carried a disease. The suspension of his medical license cut off his most visible source of respectability, and without the shield of his profession, he was left vulnerable. Banks froze his accounts under suspicion of money laundering. Luxury cars were repossessed, and his elegant home became less a symbol of success and more a prison filled with silence. The man who had once walked through hospital halls with confidence now barely stepped outside, fearing the whispers and stares that followed him everywhere. But the wound that bled deepest came not from the authorities or the public, but from discovering the identity of the person who had ignited his downfall. When Arjun finally pieced together the clues and realized that Maya Kapoor had been the source of the leaks and the evidence against him, his fury reached a boiling point. He had underestimated her resolve, dismissing her years earlier as just another disposable relationship. Now she had returned with the power to dismantle everything he had built. To Arjun, it was not merely betrayal, it was humiliation on the grandest scale. He confronted her one evening, calling her repeatedly until she finally answered. His words were filled with venom, threats, and desperation. He accused her of ruining innocent lives just to satisfy her bitterness, and he reminded her of the privileges and gifts she had once enjoyed by his side. But Maya was unmoved. For her, this was the justice she had long craved. She had stripped away his illusion of untouchability, and the fear in his voice was proof that she had succeeded. Instead of feeling guilt, she felt vindicated, as though she had finally reclaimed the power he had stolen from her when he cast her aside. Meanwhile, investigators were uncovering the vast scale of his fraud. Each marriage he had arranged was scrutinized, each financial transaction dissected. What emerged was a trail of exploitation that shocked even seasoned officials. Families had mortgaged homes, sold land, and borrowed heavily to pay Arjun's fees, believing the marriages would secure them a future in the UK. Some had indeed slipped through the cracks and settled into new lives. But others were left stranded, their money gone, and their dreams in ruins. The more that came to light, the more it became clear that Arjun had not just broken laws, he had shattered lives. As his court date loomed, Arjun's desperation deepened. His legal team urged him to cooperate, but his pride resisted. He could not bear the thought of sitting in a courtroom, publicly dissected as a fraud. The disgrace of being exposed, especially by Maya, was unbearable to a man who had once been revered. Friends turned their backs, family ties in, India grew strained, and the empire he had built with such confidence lay in ashes. The isolation pressed on him from all sides, and he began to understand that there would be no redemption, no chance to rebuild. For a man who had thrived on control and dominance, the loss of power was a fate worse than imprisonment. The storm Maya had unleashed was closing in, and he could see no way to escape it. On a gray autumn morning, the end came quietly for Arjun Malhotra. The world outside his apartment carried on. As usual, cars rushed down the streets, commuters hurried to work, and children made their way to school, but inside his once luxurious home, silence reigned. Arjun sat alone in the living room where the polished furniture and expensive now felt like hollow reminders of the life he had lost. The newspapers on his table screamed his disgrace in bold letters. Every headline reducing him from a respected doctor to a fraud and criminal. He had spent years crafting a reputation that commanded admiration, and within weeks it had been destroyed beyond repair. The investigation against him was no longer just speculation. Authorities had gathered enough evidence to charge him formally, and the upcoming trial promised to expose every detail of his schemes. There would be no way to hide the millions he had taken, the victims he had deceived, or the lies he had lived. He would not just lose his freedom. He would lose every trace of dignity that remained. The idea of standing in court, facing the people who once trusted him, was more than he could endure. On the table beside him lay a handwritten note, carefully folded, addressed simply with his name. The words inside revealed a man crushed not only by the law, but by betrayal, humiliation, and regret. He wrote of his pride, of the empire he had built, and of how it all unraveled because of someone who once loved him. Yet the note was not filled with apologies or admissions of guilt. Instead, it carried the tone of a man who saw himself as a victim of fate and vengeance. unable to accept the full weight of his actions. He ended it with a simple line that made clear his choice. He could not face what was to come. When news of his death spread, shock rippled through the community. Some were stunned that a man so accomplished could carry such secrets, while others, who had long envied his success, muttered that it was only a matter of time before the truth caught up with him. For the victims of his fraud, the news was bittersweet. His death meant they would never recover their money or see justice delivered in court. Yet it also meant that the man who had exploited them would never harm anyone again. For Maya Kapoor, the news brought a complex storm of emotions. For years, she had imagined this moment, his downfall, his destruction, his ruin. She had believed it would bring her peace, that seeing him stripped of everything would finally erase the pain of his betrayal. Instead, she felt only emptiness. She had exposed him, watched him collapse under the weight of his crimes. And now, with his death, the final chapter was written. But the satisfaction she had imagined never arrived. She was left with silence, a hollow victory that reminded her how vengeance rarely heals the wounds it seeks to avenge. Arjun's story became a cautionary tale, repeated in headlines and whispered in communities far beyond Birmingham. It was a reminder of how ambition, greed, and deceit can consume even those who appear most respected. It was also a story of how betrayal and vengeance, when intertwined, can leave destruction in their wake. In the end, nothing remained of Arjun Malhotra's empire but ruined lives, unanswered questions, and the shadow of a man who could not live with the consequences of his own choices.